The queen recovers her kingdom. Like us now and subscribe so you don't miss the checkmate. What happens when the person you built an empire with tries to erase you with a single, public act of betrayal? Tonight, we delve into the story of Eleanor Vance, the silent architect behind tech mogul Harrison Croft's meteoric rise. At the most exclusive charity gala in Manhattan, in front of the city's power brokers and media sharks, Harrison made a declaration. He stood on stage, champagne glass in hand, and introduced his glamorous young mistress as his wife. But he made one fatal miscalculation. He assumed the real Mrs. Croft would crumble. He forgot who she was. This isn't the story of a woman scorned. It's the story of a queen reclaiming her kingdom, one brilliantly devastating move at a time. Stay with us. The architects of success. The silence in their Upper East Side penthouse was a physical entity. It had weight and texture, a cold, smooth surface, like the marble floors that stretched across the cavernous space. It was a silence bought and paid for by Ether Dynamics, the tech empire of Harrison Croft. A name that evoked ancestral power for a company trading in the ephemeral currency of data and algorithms. Eleanor Vance, his wife of 12 years, had suggested the name, pulling it from an obscure text about Anglo-Saxon kings. Harrison had loved her mind once. Now that mind was a utility he took for granted, like the view of the skyline glittering like a carpet of fallen stars outside their floor-to-ceiling windows. Eleanor sat in the designer armchair in the corner of the vast living room, a first edition of a Virginia Woolf novel resting in her lap. The book was a shield. Behind it, her mind wasn't in Bloomsbury, but on the micro-expressions she had cataloged from her husband over the past 6 months. The slight, almost imperceptible hardening at the corner of his eye when she unexpectedly entered a room. The way his thumb would furtively swipe left on his phone screen, with practiced, stealthy speed. The new vocabulary of corporate jargon that was peppered with phrases he had clearly borrowed from someone else. Someone younger. Someone more digitally native. Harrison paced by the windows, his own phone glued to his ear. He was a man sculpted by success. Tailored Tom Ford suit, a Patek Philippe watch that was a subtle nod to his 7-figure bonus, a predatory energy that had once been directed at the world for them, but now felt perpetually directed in her direction. "No, Mark. The valuation is non-negotiable," he said, his voice a low, confident growl that had charmed boards and investors alike. "We are not just acquiring their hardware. We are acquiring their market position. It's a power play." Eleanor didn't look up, but her focus sharpened. He was talking about the Ariane acquisition. She had spent 3 weeks doing the deep dive analysis, disarming their financials, patent portfolio, and supply chain vulnerabilities. She had flagged a critical problem, a dependence on a single material supplier in a politically unstable region. She had penned a 12-page memo on the issue, advising a renegotiation of terms or a structured escrow account to mitigate the risk. "They'll fold," Harrison continued, oblivious to the architect of his strategy sitting 10 feet away. "We hold all the leverage." He hadn't read the memo. She knew it with a certainty, as cold and hard as the pit in her stomach. He had likely asked his new assistant, the one with impossibly white teeth and a master's in brand synergy, to summarize it in 5 bullet points. Or perhaps Serafina had summarized it for him. Serafina Rhodes. The name itself felt like cheap perfume. Eleanor had found her Instagram profile months ago. It was a curated masterpiece of ambition. Serafina on a yacht in Monaco. Serafina at a gallery opening in Chelsea. Serafina sipping espresso at a ridiculously trendy cafe. A laptop open to a presentation with the faintly visible Ether logo in the background. She was a strategic communications consultant, a title as vague and meaningless as she was ubiquitous in his circle. She was also, Eleanor knew, the reason for the late-night calls Harrison took on the terrace and the faint scent of Baccarat Rouge 540 that sometimes clung to his suits. Harrison ended his call and threw the phone onto a glass table with a sharp clatter. The sound bounced around the quiet room. "Big night tomorrow," he said, walking over to the bar and pouring himself a whiskey. He didn't offer her one. He hadn't in a long time. "The Zenith Gala," Eleanor said, her voice even. She finally closed her book, marking her page. "I was looking at the auction catalog. The Matisse sketch is interesting. It's a circus." He waved a dismissive hand. "The same people writing the same checks to feel good about themselves. Listen, about tomorrow." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, not meeting her eyes. "I think you should stay home." The pit in her stomach turned to ice. "Oh, I thought we were co-chairing the tech sector donations. I believe I was the one who secured pledges from half of Silicon Valley. Things are changing, Eleanor. The brand, the image, it's all about forward momentum, youth, energy." He finally looked at her, and his gaze was one of appraisal, as if she were a piece of furniture he was considering replacing. "Your style is classic, timeless, and that's great. But we need to project dynamism. Serafina Rhodes. She's handling our PR for the event. She believes we need a more unified front." Unified front. The corporate euphemism was so insulting it was almost comical. He was telling her to stay home so he could bring his mistress. The audacity of it, the pure, unadulterated arrogance, was breathtaking. Eleanor felt a strange calm descend over her. The pain was there, a deep, tectonic ache, but it was being overlaid by something else, a cold, crystalline anger. She had been a ghost in this marriage for a year, an uncredited co-author of his success story. He thought she was part of the decor, a stylish but faded accessory. He had forgotten that she designed the house. "I see," she said, her voice betraying nothing. "You need to project a certain image. I completely understand." He looked relieved, a flicker of surprise in his eyes that she wasn't arguing. "Exactly. Thank you for understanding, Eleanor. It's just business." "Of course," she said, rising from her chair with a grace he had long stopped noticing. She walked toward their bedroom, her back straight, her steps measured. Harrison, already turning his attention back to his phone, missed the look in her eyes. It was the look of a strategist who has just seen the entire battlefield with perfect clarity. He thought he was making a power move. He had no idea he had just handed her the opening move in a war he didn't even know was coming. Black Pawn, the chessboard, is set later that night, long after Harrison was asleep in one of the guest bedrooms, a habit he had developed in recent months. Eleanor sat at her vanity. She wasn't looking at her reflection. She was looking at her phone. She scrolled past dozens of unread messages from friends and acquaintances and opened a secure encrypted messaging app. There were only 3 contacts on it. One was a private investigator she had hired 2 months prior. The second was a man named Arthur Finch, a legendary but reclusive financial journalist. The third was a woman named Eliza Royce, the 80-year-old matriarch of one of London's oldest and most respected philanthropic families. She typed a simple message to Eliza. "Eliza, my apologies for the late hour. About tomorrow's gala. I have a small surprise I'd like to announce. Will you be presenting the keynote before the main auction is planned?" A reply came back almost instantly. "For you, dear, I'd snatch the microphone from the mayor. What do you have in mind?" Eleanor drew a slow, dangerous smile that the mirror reflected back. Harrison wanted to project a new image. She would help him. She would give him. And all of Manhattan a night of branding they would never forget. The public execution. The Atrium Grand Ballroom was a cathedral of obscene wealth. Gilded rocaille moldings dripped from the ceiling, and chandeliers the size of small cars cast a diamond-bright light over the city's elite. The air was thick with the scent of 1,000 competing perfumes and the low hum of self-congratulation. This was the Zenith Gala for children's future, an event where industry titans and old money scions paid $50,000 a table to publicly absolve themselves of the sins of capitalism. Harrison Croft arrived with Serafina Rhodes on his arm, and a wave of camera flashes preceded them. They were a vision of modern power. Harrison, in his perfectly fitted Brioni tux, looked the tech king. Serafina was stunning in a crimson sequined gown that was less a dress and more a statement. It hugged every curve, plunged audaciously at the neck, and was clearly chosen to be photographed. She laughed a little too loudly, her hand possessively on Harrison's bicep, her eyes scanning the room, not for friends, but for cameras. She was playing the part of Mrs. Croft with a desperate, ravenous energy. They made their way to the central table, where Harrison was hosting a senator and the CEO of a rival tech firm. He leaned in, his voice just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Senator, I'd like to introduce you to my wife, Serafina," he beamed. "The brilliant mind behind our new philanthropic strategy." The senator, a man who had known Eleanor for years and had once sought her counsel on tech policy, blinked in confusion. He looked from Serafina's dazzling, vacant smile to Harrison, a question mark hanging in the air. But Harrison's sheer confidence was a force of nature. He powered past the awkwardness, launching into a story about a recent trip to Davos, with Serafina nodding along as if she had been there. The lie was so audacious, so brazen, that it almost created its own reality. People were confused, whispering, but no one dared challenge Harrison Croft at the height of his power. It was at that precise moment of manufactured triumph that Eleanor Vance arrived. She didn't make an entrance. She simply appeared. Where Serafina was a firework, Eleanor was the night sky. She wore a dress of deep midnight blue silk, a custom design from a couturier so exclusive they had no label. It was deceptively simple, with a clean, sculptural cut that whispered of immense expense rather than shouted it. Her only jewelry was a pair of sapphire and diamond drop earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, and a simple platinum band on her left hand. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon, and her face was calm, her expression serene. She radiated a stillness that was more commanding than any noise. She did not walk toward Harrison's table. Instead, she walked in and paused, allowing the room to register her presence. A photographer from the Times, a veteran who recognized real power when he saw it, diverted his lens from Serafina and took a single, perfect photo of Eleanor standing alone. The whispers in the room shifted frequency. They went from confused speculation to sharp, electrical gossip. Two Mrs. Crofts. What was happening? Harrison saw her. His smile faltered for a microsecond. A crack in the polished surface, a muscle in his jaw twitched. Serafina, following his gaze, saw Eleanor and her perfectly applied smile strained, a flash of pure venom glinting in her eyes before it was replaced by practiced indifference. Eleanor ignored them. Her gaze swept the room, and she began to move. Her first stop wasn't a confrontation, but a quiet conversation. She approached a table where Charles Barringer, a notoriously gruff hedge fund manager, was seated. "Charles," Eleanor said, her voice a warm murmur. "I was so pleased to see the Barringer Foundation was a lead sponsor tonight." Charles, who had been scowling into his soup, looked up. "Eleanor, I didn't expect to see you. Harrison was just—" "Business is business," Eleanor said softly, giving him a knowing look that absolved him of any awkwardness. "But philanthropy is personal. I wanted to thank you personally for your guidance on structuring the offshore endowment fund. Your counsel was invaluable." Charles's chest puffed out. "Just common sense, dear. Glad someone listened." It was a subtle dig at Harrison, who had dismissed Charles's advice at a Hamptons brunch a year prior. She then moved across the room, where she found Eliza Royce, the matriarch, holding court. Eliza's ancient eyes, as sharp as a hawk's, gleamed when she saw Eleanor. "There she is," Eliza said, her voice carrying to nearby tables. "The woman of the hour." Eleanor merely smiled and kissed her cheek. "Eliza, you are too kind. I was just admiring the centerpiece." "Nonsense," Eliza said, tapping her champagne flute for attention. "You all know Eleanor Croft?" "Of course. What you might not know is that it was her tireless work behind the scenes that secured the Gates Foundation matching grant. Not a press release, not a photo op, but quiet, brilliant work, as it should be done." A wave of genuine applause swept through that section of the room. Harrison, watching from his table, felt a tingling of unease. He had taken credit for the Gates grant in a Forbes profile. Serafina, sensing the focus shift, tried to reclaim it. She stood up and approached a group of social media influencers, her crimson dress a beacon. "Isn't this event just everything?" she gushed, pulling out her phone for a selfie. "Giving is the new luxury." One of the influencers, a sharp-eyed young woman who ran a popular gossip site, looked from Serafina to Eleanor and back again. "We're a little confused," she said, her voice sweetly syrupy. "Harrison just introduced you as his wife, but that's Eleanor Vance. She's on the museum board." Serafina's smile didn't waver. "Oh, you know Harrison," she said with a practiced giggle. "He's a visionary. He lives in the future." It was a terrible, clumsy save, and everyone knew it. The performance was beginning to unravel at the edges. Eleanor's masterstroke was her conversation with Mark Torres, Harrison's number 2 at Ether Dynamics, the man Harrison had been talking to on the phone the night before. She found him near the bar, looking profoundly uncomfortable. "Mark," Eleanor said softly. "Eleanor, I'm sorry, I had no idea." He stammered. "There's nothing to apologize for," she said, her gaze steady and reassuring. "Harrison is making a statement. But I wanted to talk to you about another statement. The one Arian Labs is about to make when their sole cobalt supplier defaults on their next shipment. I assume Harrison shared my memo about the political instability in the region." Mark's face went white. "What memo?" "The 12-page risk analysis I emailed him 3 weeks ago," Eleanor said calmly. "The one advising him to factor in a 40% price cushion and secure a secondary supplier before the acquisition. He did get it, didn't he? Because if he signed that deal on the original terms, your entire hardware division is exposed. Shareholder value could take a 9-figure hit." Mark looked physically sick. He muttered an excuse and hurried away, pulling out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. Eleanor hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't cried or made a scene. She had simply walked the room and dismantled her husband's empire, piece by piece, with the quiet, devastating power of the truth. The seeds were sown. All she had to do now was wait for the harvest. The fall. The main course of filet mignon, which cost more than most people's weekly grocery run, was being served. But few were eating. The atmosphere in the grand ballroom was heavy, the air buzzing with unspoken tension. Harrison Croft, who had started the night as a conquering king, now looked like a man sitting on an ice throne that was rapidly melting beneath him. He could feel the shift. The fawning admirers had been replaced by rubberneckers. The respectful deference had curdled into speculative whispers. He kept shooting furious glances across the room at Eleanor, who was now seated at Eliza Royce's table, looking perfectly comfortable, engrossed in lively conversation with a Nobel Prize-winning economist. She looked radiant, powerful, and utterly indifferent to him. It was this indifference that chafed him the most. Serafina, for her part, was desperately trying to shore up their crumbling narrative. She was hopping from table to table, laughing too loudly, touching arms too familiarly. Her performance, which had seemed dazzling upon arrival, now looked like what it was: a cheap imitation. "Harrison is just so passionate about changing the world," she told a steely-faced woman who ran a multi-billion-dollar private equity fund. "That's what I love about him. His vision is so big." The woman, Patricia Lorford, looked at Serafina with the detached curiosity of a biologist studying a new, particularly colorful insect. "Historically, his vision has been tempered by Eleanor's pragmatism," she said, her voice dry as a bone. "She's the one who talked him out of that disastrous social media venture 5 years ago. Saved him $500 million. I know because I was going to short the stock." Serafina's smile wavered. She had no idea what Patricia was talking about. "Well, the future is now," she offered weakly before retreating to Harrison's side. "These people are so stuffy," she whispered to him, her voice tight with frustration. "Just smile and look beautiful," Harrison hissed back, his own smile a rigid mask. "That's your job." The public humiliation was a slow burn, a fire built with expertly laid kindling. The financial journalist Arthur Finch, a man who could smell corporate rot from miles away, watched the scene with undisguised glee. He had been watching Ether Dynamics for a while, sensing its spectacular growth was fueled by unsustainable risks. He watched Mark Torres whisper frantically to 2 other board members, their faces grim. He saw the snub Harrison received from Charles Behringer. He saw the genuine warmth and respect being afforded to Eleanor. He didn't need a press release. The story was writing itself in the body language of Manhattan's most powerful people. The breaking point came during the live auction. The auctioneer, a flamboyant man with a flair for the theatrical, was trying to drum up enthusiasm for a week stay at a private villa in Tuscany. "Do I hear 200,000 euros? He boomed, his voice echoing across the suddenly quiet room. From the back, a voice yelled, 100,000, and only if the plumbing's been updated since the Renaissance." A ripple of laughter went through the ballroom. The voice belonged to Hector Kane, a witty and notoriously sharp art dealer. He was sitting at Eleanor's table. The joke was clearly an in-club shared moment, and Harrison and Serafina were outside it. Harrison, seeing control of the night slipping entirely away from him, decided to force the issue. He stood up, grabbed the handheld microphone from a stunned event assistant, and marched onto the stage. "Friends, colleagues," he began, his voice booming artificially through the speakers. "It's wonderful to see so much generosity tonight." A silence fell over the room. This was not on the program. As we look toward the future, it's important to have a partner who shares that vision. A partner who is as modern, dynamic, and forward-thinking as the world we are trying to build. He paused and gestured dramatically toward his table. "And I am the luckiest man in the world to have that partner in my incredible wife, Serafina Croft." He waited for the applause. Instead, there was a dense, awkward silence. People were frozen, looking from Harrison on stage to Serafina, who was trying to look demure, to Eleanor, who hadn't moved a muscle. Eleanor simply took a sip of water, her expression unreadable. Harrison faltered. The silence was his condemnation. He had overplayed his hand so spectacularly that he had managed to unite the entire room, a ruthless collection of rivals and allies, in a moment of collective, second-hand embarrassment for him. He tried to recover. "Serafina and I are thrilled to announce a new initiative, the Croft Foundation for Digital Innovation, with a founding pledge of 20 million euros. He had expected gasps. He received a few scattered polite claps. The amount, though substantial, felt like a desperate gamble. It was tainted money to buy back his own image. As he stood there stranded in the spotlight, the auctioneer, seeing his opportunity to regain control, quickly jumped in. "Thank you, Harrison. A magnificent gesture. And now, before we continue with the auction, we have one final, very special announcement for the evening. I'd like to invite to the stage the woman who has been the heart and soul of this gala for the last 5 years, the esteemed matriarch of Manhattan philanthropy, Ms. Eliza Royce." Eliza, looking regal in Chanel tweed, walked slowly toward the podium, leaning on a stylish mahogany cane. The applause for her was thunderous, genuine, and a marked contrast to the silence that had greeted Harrison. Harrison was forced to retreat to his table, his face a mask of thunderous fury. Serafina tried to reach for his hand, but he snatched it away. The unraveling was now complete. The lie had been told, and no one had believed it. All that remained was for the truth to deliver the final blow. If this public betrayal reminds you of something you've seen or lived through, leave your comment. Do you think Harrison's move with Serafina was a display of power or pure desperation? Checkmate, the philanthropist's coup. Eliza Royce reached the podium and adjusted the microphone, her movements as deliberate and heavy as a Supreme Court justice taking her seat. The applause that met her was not just polite. It was a wave of genuine, heartfelt relief. The room, thrown off balance by Harrison's embarrassing display, was being righted by a figure of unimpeachable authority. "Thank you," she began, her voice an aged whiskey, smooth, potent, and with a definitive bite. "For 60 years, I've had the privilege of attending events in this beautiful room. I've witnessed declarations of love, of war, and, most often, of spectacularly large egos." A knowing chuckle rippled through the audience. Her eyes, sharp and missing nothing, took a brief, sweeping survey of the room, managing to convey both warmth and a warning. They did not linger on Harrison's table, but everyone felt the subtle chill as her gaze passed over it. "Tonight," she continued, "we gather under the banner of philanthropy. It is a marvelous word. It means, literally, love of humanity. A simple concept. Yet, in our modern era, it has become complicated. It has become entangled with branding, with marketing, with reputation laundering." The words were a direct hit. Harrison, who had just tried to use a €20 million pledge as a reputation laundering service, felt his neck tighten. Serafina's practiced smile was frozen on her face, a fragile, painted thing. "Legacy is not built on what is claimed," Eliza said, lowering her voice slightly, drawing the room in. "It is not cemented with a press release or a timely photo op. It is built on what is created. It is forged in the quiet hours of dedicated work, in the intellectual rigor of identifying a problem, and the courage to propose a solution, even when that solution is not the most profitable or popular." She let that sink in. The room was full of people who understood profit. The idea of prioritizing anything else was both alien and fascinating. For the past several years, we have celebrated a new kind of creation, the digital world, an astonishing global architecture of connection and information built by brilliant and ambitious minds. She paused. But creation without contemplation is a dangerous thing. We have built a global village and forgotten to write laws. We have given our children the keys to the kingdom without teaching them how to govern. We have celebrated the disruptors, but failed to manage the disruption. The result is a deficit, not a financial deficit, but an ethical one. The Nobel economist at Eleanor's table was nodding slowly, his expression rapt. Patricia Lorford was scribbling fiercely on a napkin. This wasn't a charity speech. It was a thesis. It is my distinct honor tonight to announce the launch of an institution dedicated to addressing that deficit. An institution built not on ego, but on intellect, not on branding, but on a genuine love of humanity. Therefore, it is a profound pleasure for me to announce the formation of the Vance Institute for Digital Ethics. The name dropped into the room like a bomb wrapped in velvet. Vance, Eleanor's maiden name. The shock was instantaneous and seismic. An audible collective gasp swept the ballroom. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Harrison looked like he had been shot. The blood drained from his face, leaving a pale, sickly mask of utter disbelief. He slowly, mechanically turned his head to stare at Eleanor, who remained perfectly still, a serene island in a sea of chaos. Serafina's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. The carefully constructed fantasy she had been living in for the past 6 months had just been vaporized. Eliza held up a hand for silence, a gesture of effortless authority. The Vance Institute is launching with an initial endowment of 70 million euros. If the first announcement was a bomb, this was the shockwave. The room erupted. 7 million. It was a number that commanded respect, even in this rarefied atmosphere. It dwarfed Harrison's pledge, making it insignificant, almost insulting. Charles Berenger let out a low whistle. Arthur Finch, the journalist, was grinning like a Cheshire cat, scribbling furiously on his notepad. The story had just moved from social gossip to the front page of the financial section. This foundational endowment, Eliza announced, her voice cutting through the noise like a clarion call, comes from the private family trust of its founder. It is her own money, earned and managed with a foresight that, I must say, is quite impressive. The implication was clear. This wasn't Croft money. This was Vance power. Furthermore, Eliza's smile was now triumphant. I am proud to announce that my own family's foundation, the Royce Foundation, along with the Berenger Foundation, she nodded gracefully to a beaming Charles Berenger, and several other key partners represented in this room tonight, have already pledged an additional 50 million euros in matching funds for the Institute's first 5 years of operation. 125 million euros. The number hung in the air, impossible and glittering. Harrison Croft's world had just been revalued, and he was on the losing side of the exchange. The Institute's first mandate, Eliza declared, her voice ringing with the passion of a true believer, will be to develop and distribute an open-source K-12 curriculum on data privacy, algorithmic bias, and digital citizenship. It will be provided free of charge to any public school system in the country. It will directly address the ethical void left by the very companies that have reshaped our world with little regard for the long-term consequences for our children. It was a perfectly executed maneuver. She had framed the entire tech industry, Harrison's industry, as the villain, and she had just announced the hero coming to the rescue. Harrison felt the floor sinking beneath his feet. He was being publicly emasculated, his life's work reframed as a societal poison, and the antidote was being funded and founded by the woman he had just attempted to erase. And now, Eliza said, her voice softening, filled with genuine affection and pride, it is a great honor and a personal joy for me to introduce the founder, the architect, and the visionary leader of this vital new undertaking, a woman of substance, intellect, and profound grace. Please welcome Ms. Eleanor Vance. The standing ovation was a physical force, a roar of sound and approval that shook the crystal chandeliers. It was a release of all the pent-up tension of the night, a collective judgment delivered in a wave of applause. The room was united not just in favor of Eleanor, but against Harrison. They were applauding her intelligence, her courage, and most of all, her exquisite and perfectly executed vengeance. Eleanor rose from her seat. She walked to the stage with the same quiet, unhurried grace with which she had entered the room hours, a lifetime, earlier. She shook Eliza's hand with warmth and turned to face the audience, her audience now. She stood at the podium, a solitary, powerful figure in midnight blue, and waited with unnerving patience for the thunderous applause to subside. When she spoke, her voice wasn't loud, but it was perfectly modulated, filled with a quiet, resonant power that cut through the residual hum and commanded the absolute attention of every person in the room. "Thank you, Eliza," she began, her voice steady. "And thank you all. For 12 years, I have had the privilege of a front-row seat to the creation of the future. I have witnessed the genius, the relentless drive that has connected our world in ways we could never have imagined. It has been an education." She paused, her gaze sweeping the sea of faces, a look that was direct and inclusive, yet somehow managed to make Harrison feel wholly and utterly invisible. "But with great power," she continued, "comes a deep responsibility that cannot be outsourced or delegated. For too long, the human cost of innovation has been dismissed as an externality, a line item on a balance sheet that is never reconciled. The Vance Institute is my promise, and our promise," she said, gesturing elegantly toward Eliza, Charles, and her other new partners, to begin that reconciliation. "It is a pledge to the next generation that we will not only give them more powerful tools, but we will give them the wisdom and the ethical framework to use those tools for the betterment of humanity, not just for the enrichment of a few." She was poised, she was eloquent, and she was fiercely intelligent. She was not a scorned wife seeking retribution. She was a stateswoman, a founder, a force to be reckoned with, laying out a manifesto. "The work is vast, but it is essential," she concluded, her voice ringing with an impossible-to-doubt conviction. "And it begins tomorrow. Thank you for being here tonight to witness its commencement." She gave a small, dignified nod. She did not smile a triumphant smile. She simply radiated a serene, unshakable confidence. She turned and stepped off the stage, her task complete. She did not look back at the disaster she had created. She didn't have to. The spotlight, which Harrison had tried so desperately to steal for his mistress, was now hers. He was left in the darkness, a ghost at his own gala, sitting at a table with the ruins of his reputation, and a woman who was now publicly and irrevocably not his wife. The real wife had not only stolen the spotlight, she had become the sun around which the entire room revolved. The final move. Eleanor did not flee the ballroom. Flight was an admission of guilt, a gesture of weakness. Instead, after her speech, she descended from the stage and moved with deliberate calm back to her seat beside Eliza Royce. She became a center of gravity. People did not swarm her, but a slow, respectful orbit formed. The Nobel economist leaned in, eyes alight with intellectual fire, already debating the finer points of her curriculum implementation. Patricia Lorford, the private equity titan, gave her a dry, approving nod from a neighboring table, a gesture that, in their world, was the equivalent of an oath of loyalty. They no longer saw Harrison Croft's wife. They were seeing a formidable peer. She allowed herself 10 minutes in this new reality. 10 minutes to cement her position. She laughed at a joke from Hector Kane. She accepted a glass of champagne and listened intently as Charles Berenger promised to connect her with his contacts in the Department of Education. Every moment was a performance of effortless command. Not once did she look toward the table where her husband sat, a black hole of rage sucking all the light and joy from his immediate vicinity. She could feel his gaze like physical pressure, a hot, concentrated beam of impotent fury. Finally, she leaned toward Eliza and squeezed her hand. "I think I have taken up enough of your evening, dear," she murmured. "Nonsense," Eliza whispered back, her eyes twinkling. "This is the most fun I've had since I beat Aristotle Onassis at auction for that island in 73. Go. The next phase begins now." Eleanor stood up. The room seemed to hold its breath as she began her exit. It was a master class in subtlety. She glided between tables. A word here, a brief smile there. It was a royal procession. As she passed the table where the gossip influencer was seated, the young woman merely looked at her with wide, astonished eyes and whispered, "Iconic." Her path did not take her near Harrison. She moved toward the grand exit on the opposite side of the ballroom, a route she had planned in her mind hours before. The driver she had hired, not the company car Harrison used, but a private service loyal only to her, would be waiting at the east entrance, away from the paparazzi scrum out front. She was almost at this door when a hand grabbed her arm, not roughly, but with a desperate, possessive clutch. Harrison. He had crossed the entire ballroom, a crimson-clad Seraphina trailing in his wake like a whining, frightened shadow. His face was a thunderous mask, his eyes burning. "Where do you think you're going?" he hissed, his voice low and venomous. Eleanor slowly turned her head and looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up to his face. She did not speak. She didn't have to. Her look of pure, unadulterated disgust was enough. He snatched his hand back as if he had been burned. "You planned this," he accused, his voice shaking with rage. "You set out to humiliate me." "Humiliation is a choice, Harrison," she replied, her voice as cold and clear as ice water. "You made yours when you asked me to stay home. I simply made mine. This institute," he spat the word, "this little vanity project. Where did you get that kind of money? Did you embezzle it?" The accusation was so absurd, so revealing of his own transactional worldview, that Eleanor almost laughed. Seraphina, standing behind him, flinched. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a multi-car pileup, completely out of her depth. "Harrison," Eleanor said, lowering her voice to a whisper, forcing him to lean in to hear. A final, subtle assertion of control. "You are making a scene, and you've been the star of too many scenes tonight. Let me be very clear. My finances are my own. They always have been. You were so busy building your empire, you never bothered to look at the one I was quietly managing alongside you." She turned to leave. "You're not going anywhere," he growled, taking a step after her. "We're going home. Our home. And we're going to fix this." Eleanor paused on the threshold of the grand door. She turned, and for the first time allowed a hint of what looked like pity into her expression. "There is no we anymore, Harrison. There is no our home. I'm going to my hotel. And you? You are going to be very, very busy tomorrow." And with that, she walked out of the ballroom, leaving him standing there, exposed and defeated, with the entire elite of Manhattan as his audience. The car ride to the Plaza Hotel was silent. Eleanor leaned her head against the cool leather and closed her eyes, the adrenaline of the night finally beginning to recede, leaving a hollow, aching exhaustion in its wake. This was not a victory to be celebrated with champagne. It was a necessary amputation. Painful, bloody, but essential for survival. She had secured the presidential suite weeks prior under an assumed name. Her bags, packed by a discreet service, were already in the closets. She had just removed her sapphire earrings and placed them on the mahogany dresser when a frantic, insistent buzzing came from the suite intercom. The front desk. "Ms. Vance, I am terribly sorry to bother you. There is a Mr. Croft in the lobby. He is very insistent that he be allowed up." Eleanor walked to the window. 34 floors below, the lights of Manhattan glittered. A city of 8 million people, and all she felt was a profound solitude. "Tell Mr. Croft," she said, her voice steady, "that Ms. Vance is not taking visitors. If he does not vacate the premises, you have my permission to call hotel security." Moments of silence, and then a new voice on the intercom, raw and desperate. Harrison had obviously snatched the phone from the concierge. "Eleanor, let me in. We need to talk. You can't do this." She simply pressed the button to disconnect the call. He was used to getting his way, to his voice being the one that commanded attention. The silence he was met with now would be more maddening to him than any argument. 20 minutes later, the inevitable happened. A furious, insistent pounding on her suite door. He must have bribed or bullied his way past the front desk and elevator security. Eleanor took a deep breath. She walked toward the door, her silk robe whispering against the floor. She did not open it. "Go away, Harrison," she said, her voice quiet and even through the thick wood. "Open this damn door. You owe me an explanation after everything I've given you." "What you've given me." Her voice was laced with dangerous irony. "You've given me sleepless nights, the scent of another woman's perfume on my clothes, and public humiliation. I think we're even." "That money!" he roared, his voice muffled, but his rage clear. "7.5 million. Where did it come from? That's our money. That's ether money." "It's Vega family money, Harrison. My grandfather's. The inheritance I received the year before we married. The one you called a nice little nest egg. I invested it. I grew it. While you built ether dynamics with leveraged debt and high-risk acquisitions, I was building my own fortune with discipline and foresight. I never touched a euro of our marital assets. Ask your lawyers. They will find it is all perfectly firewalled. I made sure of it." There was a stunned silence from the other side of the door. She had just detonated his entire perception of her. He had seen her as a dependent, a stylish accessory to his success. He never imagined she had her own arsenal. "And the Institute," she continued, pressing her advantage, "is not a vanity project. It is a direct response to the ethical rot at the heart of your industry. A rot you have willfully ignored. While you chased valuations, the world was waking up to the harm your products were causing. The Vance Institute is not an attack on you. Then, it's simply getting ahead of the curve, something you used to be." A keycard beeped in the lock. Serafina. He must have brought her with him. The door swung open. Harrison stood there, his face contorted in a mask of disbelief and fury. Behind him, Serafina Rhodes looked small and terrified, her crimson gown now looking garish and cheap in the soft lighting of the suite. "You think you can just leave?" Harrison advanced into the room. "And what? Take half of everything I've built?" Eleanor did not move. On the marble console beside the door lay a unique, elegant navy folder. She picked it up. "I don't want half of Ether Dynamics, Harrison. I don't want your stock options or your bonuses. I don't want this penthouse or the house in the Hamptons. All of that is contaminated. It is yours." She held out the folder to him. "These are the divorce papers. My lawyers drafted them last week. The terms are very simple. I am dissolving our marriage. I am reverting to my maiden name, and I am waiving any and all claims to your fortune." He stared at the folder as if it were a poisonous snake. "You're waiving? Everything?" "You built your empire on the ethos of disruption," she said. "Consider this my disruption of our marriage. I want nothing from you. A clean cut." Harrison was speechless. He was a man who understood transactions, leverage, negotiations. This was something else. An absolute rejection. It was a move so powerful in its simplicity that he had no countermeasure for it. He had come here ready for a fight over money, expecting tears and recriminations. Instead, he was met with a level of indifference so profound, it was like an annulment of his entire existence. His eyes fell on Serafina, who was huddled by the door, and his humiliation curdled into a new, directed rage. He needed a victim. He needed someone to blame. "Get out!" he snarled. Not at Eleanor, but at Serafina. "What?" she stammered. "Harrison, I said get out!" he roared, his voice cracking. "This is your fault. You and your stupid PR strategy, projecting a unified front. You pushed for this. You wanted to be seen. Well, look around you. Everyone saw you. They saw you for what you are, a cheap, social-climbing little consultant." He threw the final word at her like an epithet. The dream died in Serafina's eyes. The fantasy of becoming Mrs. Harrison Croft, of yachts and galas, and a life of effortless luxury, dissolved into sordid, cheap reality. She was an employee under contract, and her contract had just been violently terminated. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. With a choked sob, she turned and fled down the hall. Harrison stood panting in the center of the magnificent suite, a deposed king in a borrowed room. He looked at Eleanor, a final desperate plea in his eyes. He was looking for the woman he had married, the partner who had once soothed his rages and celebrated his victories. He found no trace of her. In her place was Ms. Vance. "You should leave now, Harrison," she said, her voice drained of all emotion. "You have an emergency board meeting at 7 o'clock. I hear they are very concerned about the Aryan Labs acquisition. Apparently, some troublesome risk factors have come to light." The final blow. It wasn't just personal. It was business. She wasn't just leaving him. She was positioning herself to become his rival, or worse, his replacement. He finally took the folder from her hand, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the suite, out of her life. Eleanor closed the door and leaned against it, the silence of the room washing over her again. She did not cry. She did not smile. She simply stood there breathing. It was over. The marriage was a casualty, a piece of collateral damage in her fight for her own soul. Her phone buzzed on the dresser. She picked it up. 2 new messages had come into the secure app. The first was from Arthur Finch. "Front page of the Financial Times confirmed. They're running the photo of you alone. They're calling it the philanthropist's coup. Need a quote for the headline. Your words." The second was from Mark Torres. "The board is panicking. They want to know your price to consult on the Aryan deal. They want you to present your risk analysis at the 7 a.m. meeting. Name your terms, Eleanor." Whatever terms. Eleanor walked to the vast window and looked out at the city lights, which no longer felt so lonely. They looked like a promise, a kingdom waiting. She thought for a moment, then typed her reply to Arthur Finch. The headline is, "The future is ethical. Eleanor Vance is building it." She had won the battle. The war for the future had just begun. Final question for the audience. What was the ultimate checkmate move by Eleanor? Was it the $125 million endowment, or the waiver of all claims in the divorce? If you love stories of drama, betrayal, and ultimate triumph, where the underestimated rise to take what is rightfully theirs, then be sure to like. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder of their own strength. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel. We bring you the most compelling real-life drama stories every week, and you won't want to miss what comes next.